What's up, everyone? Well, today I'm going to be sharing with you my Mame disaster. Now, what would normally be a lot of fun in terms of my Mame tray, after the last session that I shared, I instead had a little bit of a problem, and that was that I cut off all of the escape routes that go down into the tray in late fall. And in late fall here in San Francisco, usually the weather's pretty mild, we get a little bit higher humidity, but we also sometimes get things like what Southern California gets in terms of weather, and that is offshore wind events where there's very low humidity. It happened that after I did that session that I left for a couple of days and thought that the trees would be fine. My wife watered them for me, but they managed to dry out and be stressed anyway. So this Cotoneaster is toast, as well as this one, which was, I'm not going to say it was one of my favorites, but it was certainly a cute little tree. So bye-bye to that one. Now, this one, which probably is my favorite, seems to be recovering, but it needs to be repotted, so I'm going to go through that today. And then the biggest of the disasters, I think, is that this Kishu has gotten really stressed out. So we're going to take a look at this one, as well as cleaning up the tray and prepping it for some new trees. All right, so first things first, so I can actually see what I'm doing. The maple is obviously sort of taking over the entire tray, and so I'm going to go ahead and trim that back at least roughly. I had already pinched some of the shoots, but I tend to let things run a little bit in the spring, and the maple got an early start compared to many of the other trees in this tray. All right, so that looks pretty cute now, and definitely a lot more in scale with the pot. As is typical of non-dwarf maples, it sort of has a mind of its own, and I'm going to be doing some more dwarf maple projects so that I can have something that stays a little bit more in scale in terms of Mame. The next thing that I need to get into control is this volunteer Cypress here in the corner. I've already trimmed it back a few times, but as I've mentioned in some other videos, these guys seed themselves from one of my neighbor's trees, and then they are very, very fast growers. This one's not even in a smaller pot. It just volunteered in the tray, and I decided rather than pulling it out to just sort of play around with it and see what happened. So I'm, rather than letting it be its own little seedling, turning it into like a little a little gumdrop. All right, and with those two trimmed, I can actually kind of see what I'm doing. I'm going to pull apart some of these and take a look at individuals. So let's start with the ugly, and we'll head towards prettier as we go. This is one of my favorite trees, and it's over 10 years old, and unfortunately it almost died. It may still die, but it still has some green in there, and it looks like it may be starting to recover in terms of pushing just a few short tips. So I'm not going to cut any roots or anything off of this, but I am going to take it out of this tiny container and put it into something where it has a little bit more room to grow. It's also due for a repot anyway. So like I said, I'm not going to do really anything to this other than plunk it into a new container. I don't know whether it's going to live or not, but if it's going to live, I won't know for a couple of months. Now, just to be clear, under almost any other circumstances, I would have done some root work to this rather than just potting it up into this container. But with it teetering on the edge of death, all of the tips being brown and just a little bit of green on the inside, I don't want to do anything to compromise the health of the tree further, and I'll just have to wait and see whether it decides it's going to continue living. All right, next up is my little Cotoneaster in a Bob Potts pot here, and this one almost died on me, but it looks like it's going to recover. It was due for a repot anyway, so I'm going to pull off this moss, and then I'm also going to put this in a slightly bigger container because the trunk has actually gotten a lot bigger from the escape rooting while it's been in this container. And I want to give it something that'll make it so it actually stands up, which it did when I put it in here, but now it's not. All right, in this case, because it did have such a close brush with death, I'm only going to do a little bit of root work that I just did, as well as a slight amount of trimming here. Moving forward, I might cut this back a little bit more to get it down to a smaller size, because it's definitely gotten a lot wider this way. And I'm putting just a few larger particles of soil in the bottom so that the shohin sized soil doesn't go through the screen. All right, definitely quite a bit bigger pot. I didn't do a whole lot of root work, and I think I can probably get it back into a smaller one, but for now, I just want to let the tree grow for the next year or so. And I'm going to replace this moss that was on it before to ensure that the top of the root ball doesn't get a lot drier than it would have prior to the repot. All right, so from one blue pot to another. Now this tiny little pine has been in this Bob Potts pot for at least 2 years now, so I'm going to go ahead and give it a repot, and I may just put it right back into the same container. As you might imagine, if you are familiar with pines, it didn't actually suffer at all from drying out compared to the junipers and the Cotoneasters. So next up is this little teeny Kishu. This is one of my older ones as well, and it didn't suffer as a result of the watering / weather incident. It was already cut back last year because I'm trying to make the crown more compact, and then I'm probably going to take this whole lower section off in favor of some really tiny branches right now. But there's not enough growth right here yet to cut off all of that. And in order to encourage that to grow, I think I'm just going to let the whole thing sort of be. The only thing I'm contemplating is whether or not it needs a repot, because I can't actually remember. So if I can't remember, that probably means that it needs one. This pot looks like it would be really fun, but for now, I think I'm going to put it back into this slightly larger one that I had it in before. Okay, so setting that Kishu aside, I have a couple of olives here that are super cute and kind of like my holdbacks from a release we did on Bonsaify.com last year. These have only been in these containers for about a year now, so I'm not going to repot them, even though I probably could if I wanted to. I'm just going to kind of let them continue developing. I am keeping them trimmed back as much as I can. Olives tend to be relatively cooperative in terms of back budding, but not perfect. So this is an Itoigawa from cutting that I propagated and then have kind of been growing slowly in this container. I did some wiring, and then you can see that there's a small gin there, and I've twisted the trunk around quite a bit to get it to have more movement and whatnot. But what I haven't done so far is a lot of cutback, and it's going to be a little bit painful when I do have to do the cutback, because all the movement on this one is pretty cool, but the trunk just keeps getting longer and longer, and I sort of want to cut it back. I'm going to cut this off first. Now, in terms of today, I'm going to go ahead and repot it, and we'll see if I put it back in this hat trick Bob Potts pot. So one of the things I'm kind of struggling with here is that there's just one tie wire, but it's really hard to get the scissors into this section in order to be able to cut it. Well, I cut something. And now with the repotting out of the way, I'll go ahead and assemble the entire tray. Well, that was a lot of fun, and I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I do. I've got the tray reassembled, and I'll go ahead and set this back out to grow for a little while and report on if I have any further disasters. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.